Hey guys, it's Libby and welcome to my wrap up for the month of November, which was largely dominated by reading for nonfiction November. So I read 3 works of nonfiction and 1 novel, just to mix it up. I did not get to Testament of Youth, which was my really chunky choice for nonfiction November on my TBR. I completely forgot that I was flying to the US to visit my family for Thanksgiving. When I was making my TBR, and I didn't really want to bring this giant book, and also I didn't want to say like, go away family that I get to see once every couple of years. I've got this book to read. So that one ended up getting crossed off the TBR. Maybe I'll be reading it next nonfiction November. But the first book that I actually read was John McWhorter's 9 Nasty Words, English in the Gutter, which is a history and linguistics of swear words in English. The introduction of this book gives us the sort of psychology behind swearing, talking about how sort of swear words are unlike other language and they're like stored in a different part of the brain. So like people who have brain damage that affects their speech may still be able to swear normally. Then each of the chapters normally focuses on one curse word. A couple get lumped together, so damn and hell are together because they're both the religious ones, and all of the genital words get lumped together into one chapter. And within each chapter, McWhorter gives us the history of this words, the etymology, so like what's its language of origin, was it always used as a curse word or did it originally have a more benign meaning? And then the part that I found most interesting comes sort of more towards the end of each chapter when he talks about like the interesting elements of grammar that these curse words have acquired. So for example, he'll talk about like what grammatically is going on in the sentence, the fuck if I know. Like normally in English, you can't start a sentence with a noun that is not the subject or the object of a preposition. What's going on there? This is my 3rd, I think, John McWhorter book. I also listen to his podcast, Lexicon Valley, so I'm a big fan. This is the first John McWhorter book that I listened to the audiobook of, and he reads the audiobook himself. So I was kind of just treating this like an extra long podcast episode. And some of this information has been covered in episodes of Lexicon Valley if you are also a fan. So one thing that I did is when I'm listening to audiobooks, I normally speed it up. I'll listen at like 1.5 or 2 times speed. When I'm listening to podcasts, I don't do that because McWhorter's podcast is mainly just him talking. But a lot of the podcasts I listen to are conversations, and it feels weird to be listening to a conversation sped up to me. So yeah, I'm not used to listening to podcasts sped up, and I didn't listen to this audiobook sped up. I wanted it at the normal pace. Another reason to listen to McWhorter's podcast at the standard speed is that he does incorporate some music, and music normally does not sound good sped up. In this, so if you're familiar with his podcast, you'll know that like he does insert clips of music, a lot of like mid-century Broadway show tunes, but also some like Looney Tunes sound clips. And he makes reference to those things in here, but he does not, there aren't any sound clips like because they couldn't afford the rights or something, unfortunately. So I did kind of miss that. There was at one point, he was talking about a line from, I believe, Gilbert and Sullivan, and he said, I am not allowed to sing this because we can't get the rights to it, even though I really want to sing this. John, I just want to let you know, Gilbert and Sullivan is a 19th century work, so all of their work is in the public domain. You should have sung, you had every right to sing a Gilbert and Sullivan piece. Anyway, I gave 9 Nasty Words 5 stars, really liked it, highly recommend. It's quite short, it's very like easy, fun, and educational read. Then I went on to Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda Leduc. This is a sort of half memoir, half kind of amateur enthusiast literary criticism of fairy tales from a disability lens. So Amanda Leduc has cerebral palsy, which resulted in some developmental problems in her right leg, so she walks with a limp. For anyone interested in picking up this book, let me just say that I did not enjoy chapter 1. I found chapter 1 extremely disappointing. There's a short either introduction or preface where she says, like, this is not, I am not an academic of fairy tales. This is not an academic work. That's not what I'm trying to do. I kind of ignored that because I was interested in a more academic discussion of fairy tales. And the first chapter does not deliver on that. Seems kind of meandering and just sort of lacked thesis. So I was prepared to be extremely disappointed in this book. However, all of the other chapters I liked a lot better. So do not bail just on chapter 1. If you're gonna bail, at least get through chapter 2. While Leduc spends some time addressing the sort of historical context of various fairy tales, it's a lot of Grimm, Perrault, and other French fairy tales, and Hans Christian Andersen. While she does, focus a bit on the historical context of those fairy tales, the book is more interested in how these are interpreted by modern audiences. So, for example, she talks about how, as a child absorbing all of these fairy tales, one of the big tropes in fairy tales is the removal of disability as a reward for being good, and how this made her and other people who had been disabled as children that she spoke with feel like, they really need to be good, and if they are still having whatever problems they're having after a couple of years, it just means like, oh, they're bad and they haven't worked hard enough at virtue or whatever. So I overall gave this 4 stars. Mostly really enjoyed it, but like I said, chapter 1, not great. And I feel like the other chapters could have been a little bit more thesis driven. And also in my edition, there were what I would consider to be editing errors in some cases. There was one case where a close quotation mark that I think was supposed to be there wasn't there, and I had a really hard time understanding that sentence. And also, Leduc misused the word erstwhile. Erstwhile, a lot of people misuse the word erstwhile to mean something like tenacious, I think. The definition of erstwhile is former or previous. And I don't have a problem with the average person not knowing the definition of erstwhile, but if you are a professional book editor, you do need to know the definition of the word erstwhile, and you need to correct it when your authors misuse it. Anyway, still very much worth a read, 4 stars. Next thing I finished was that work of fiction that I had to sneak in there, which was Gone to Earth by Mary Webb. So a month or 2 ago, I read Precious Bane by Mary Webb, and I'm continuing on with her oeuvre. Mary Webb was writing in the early 20th century, but this book is set earlier than that. And it's about a young woman, or even really a teenager, named Hazel Woodis, who lives in a small community. She and her father are itinerant musicians, so Hazel has a very beautiful music voice, singing voice. Or I guess they're not really itinerant, they do have a house, but they are a hub and spoke system of musical performances. And one of the very interesting things that's going on in this book is that I read Hazel as autistic. So autism wasn't named until I think the 1940s, and it wasn't really understood until then either. I mean, is autism even understood now? We're working on it. So I don't think Mary Webb obviously didn't know what autism was, but I would not be surprised if she was basing a lot of Hazel's characteristics on a person that she knew who was autistic. So Hazel is very sensitive to animals and the suffering of animals. She has a pet fox, and the title of the book, Gone to Earth, is a call that is used in fox hunting. And by comparison, she seems much less interested in people. She also isn't very good at reading between the lines or picking up on analogies or hyperbole. And at one point she sees an image of the crucifixion, and she reacts as though she's never seen an image of the crucifixion before, which I think is highly unlikely. given that she lives in a Christian country. But I think if she has seen them and just like not interested, ignores it, doesn't record a memory of it. So this book is very interesting, but I gotta tell you, it is also seriously a bummer. I first started reading Mary Webb because I heard she had a lot of similarities to Thomas Hardy in her writing, and Gone to Earth is definitely very similar to Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Hazel, in addition to her lovely singing voice, is also very physically attractive, and there are two men who are interested in her, one of whom is clearly just villainous, and the other one is trying to do the right thing. So I'd say maybe don't pick this book up if you're already in kind of a low mood. I gave it 3 stars. And finally, I read Clothing and Landscape in Victorian England, Working Class Dress and Rural Life by Rachel Worth. This is about the realities of rural work and life in Victorian England. It's specifically England, and it doesn't even include Cornwall, because apparently what was going on in Cornwall was very different than what was going on in the rest of England. So if you are like particularly a scholar of Cornish life, this book will unfortunately not be helpful for you. It also has chapters on how clothing was acquired and maintained, and what the role of women was in this, and also how the clothing related work fits into the rest of the work landscape. I'm using landscape metaphorically here, in Victorian England. And it also has a significant focus on how rural working class dress was represented in art for typically urban middle and upper class consumption. So we've got a chapter on Thomas Hardy, obviously, as well as painting and the brand new art of photography. So Worth talks about things like the fact that a lot of photography of the rural working class was staged. So sometimes photographers would even bring like costumes for his subjects to wear, and they weren't wearing their real clothes. This is the most academic book that I read for Nonfiction November. It is extremely fact dense. So since I'm not a scholar in this field, I just kind of let the facts wash over me, leaving a general impression. I can't say I absorbed that much because there was so much to absorb. But the writing style is still fairly accessible. I would say you do need to be familiar with your English counties and like which ones are where, because she does, she'll name a county and not give any context of where its location is. And you also need to be familiar with the British currency system pre-decimalization. So at one point in comparing like men and women's pay, she says like the average man's salary was 6 shillings per week, and the average woman's salary was 8 pence per day. And I'm like, okay, I can tell that the women are making less, but okay, so 8 pence per day, how many pence are in a shilling? I think it's 20 pence in a shilling, 12 shillings in a pound. But then I have to like multiply that by 7 and then divided by 20. This part was not intuitive to me. So 5 stars overall to Clothing and Landscape. I think this will be a good choice for a lot of people next Nonfiction November as a transition out of Victober. So that is all I read in the past month. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you again soon.